Has this ever happened to you? A woman's gaze, once warm and inviting, now holds a quiet, distant fire. Her presence lingers, yet she moves like the tide, retreating, not from fear, but with a measured grace that feels untouchable. You think she's leaving you. You think she's cold. But what you don't yet see is that she is stepping into a power that is older than the walls of any home, older than the stories you tell yourself about love. Carl Jung would say she has touched the edge of her own self, that inner sovereign reality unshaken by your validation or absence. This is not abandonment. This is reclamation. It is the soul's instinct to draw its energy inward when the external world begins to overfeed on it. You see, most people think power is loud, declarations, ultimatums, a visible show of strength. But the most formidable power a woman can wield is silence coupled with self-possession. Her stillness is not the absence of feeling. It is the reorganization of her inner world away from the gravitational pull of another's approval. It is the moment she recognizes that attachment without boundaries is not love. It is erosion. When she pulls away, she is not punishing you. She is repairing herself. She is severing the unconscious threads that bind her worth to your recognition. Jung called this individuation the process of becoming whole unto oneself, where the feminine no longer plays only the role of mirror to the masculine ego, but instead turns that mirror inward. She studies her own reflection. She meets her own shadow. And here lies the truth most fear to name. When a woman truly begins to see her shadow, she sees the ways she has bent, softened, and shrunk to keep a man's love warm. She sees how much of her power was siphoned away under the guise of devotion. This awareness is not gentle. It does not ask permission. It is volcanic. She feels it in her bones. That pull away is the first exhale after years of holding her breath. She doesn't need to make a scene. The world can feel it in the shift of her energy. Her voice carries a different weight. Her absence fills more space than her presence once did. This is why you feel it so sharply. Because you are no longer standing opposite a dependent reflection. You are standing before a sovereign entity. Do you know what terrifies a man more than her anger? Her indifference. Not the cold, dead kind born of bitterness, but the radiant indifference of a woman whose self-worth no longer sways with his affection. Her essence becomes something like marble, smooth, immovable, impervious to the grasping hands of insecurity. She still feels, but her feelings are no longer for sale. The pullback is a ritual in disguise. In those silent spaces, she is burning the contracts she once signed with her own silence. She is dissolving the agreements that told her to love at the expense of her own soul. And you, if you dare, can watch. But you cannot own this transformation. You cannot stop it because it was never about you. Jung said the meeting with oneself is the most feared of all encounters. When a woman meets herself in this way, she walks through the underworld of her own psyche. She confronts the anima within her, the part that has long been in service to the dreams, wounds, and shadows of the men she's loved. She speaks with her own darkness, not to destroy it, but to integrate it. And in doing so, she no longer seeks completion in you. This is where you feel the ground shift. She no longer responds to the same triggers. The things you once used to draw her close, sweet words, sudden distance, subtle control, lose their power. It's as if you've been playing a game and she has quietly stepped off the board. And here is the paradox. When she pulls away like this, she becomes more magnetic. Not because she plays hard to get, but because she's no longer playing at all. Authenticity draws like gravity. A woman who needs nothing from you radiates a presence that is almost unbearable to the unprepared heart. If you are wise, you will not chase her out of fear of losing her. You will watch how she holds herself when she no longer needs you to hold her. For in that stillness lies the lesson you are meant to learn, that love is strongest when it stands alongside power, not in place of it. Her retreat is not a closing of doors, but an opening of gates, the ones that lead inward to the fortress she is rebuilding stone by stone. It is an act of both survival and creation. It is the sacred pause before she emerges, not as the woman you once knew, but as the woman she was always meant to be. Her withdrawal is not absence. It is a furnace in which she tempers her will. To the untrained eye, she seems to fade into the background, yet in truth she is expanding beyond the frame of the relationship itself. The feminine spirit, when denied the full expression of her value, retreats not to weaken, but to refine. It is the same instinct that draws a wounded animal into the shadows, not to surrender, but to heal in secrecy, free from the noise of outside judgment. In the language of Carl Jung, this is the anima reclaiming her sovereignty. The male unconscious often mistakes her silence for defeat, but the archetypal woman is not defined by another's gaze. She is defined by her own axis, her own alignment with the deeper laws of her psyche. She understands the shadow, the hidden fears, the buried shames that swirl in both herself and in the man who fails to see her worth. And she knows that to remain tethered to someone still chained to their projections is to be swallowed by a prison not of her making. In those moments, you may think she's slipping away from you. In truth, she is slipping back into herself. She is gathering the fragments of her spirit that were scattered in the name of pleasing, proving, appeasing. Every step she takes away from the grasp of neediness is a step deeper into the forest of her own becoming. And like all journeys into the deep woods, it is guided not by the chatter of the mind, but by the silent pull of instinct, the same instinct that calls the seasons, that shifts the tides. Men who cannot see this will fight her departure, mistaking it for betrayal. They will pursue her with a desperation that only confirms her decision to leave. For in the ancient language of attraction, chasing what has chosen to walk away rarely brings it closer. It only reveals your own fear of being without it, and she is no longer a participant in that fear. You must understand, pulling away is not a rejection of love. It is a rejection of imbalance. It is the refusal to pour her essence into a vessel that leaks. She knows that constant giving without equal receiving does not make her virtuous. It makes her depleted. And a depleted woman cannot love fully, cannot create, cannot inspire. She becomes a ghost of herself, haunting the corridors of someone else's expectations. That is not a life. So she leaves. There is a reason Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Her withdrawal is the opening act of that privilege. It is the first breath of air after being underwater too long. It is not cruelty. It is clarity. And here is where her true power lies, in the ability to walk away without bitterness. For bitterness is still an attachment, a thread that binds her to the very energy she is freeing herself from. Instead, she moves like the tide, calm yet unstoppable, carrying with her the quiet dignity of one who knows her worth cannot be negotiated. If you are the one watching her go, know this. She is not punishing you, she is teaching you, though the lesson may cut deep. She is showing you that love without respect is not love. It is dependency wearing a mask. She is showing you that presence without depth, is not presence. It is convenience mistaken for care. And in showing you these things, she offers you a mirror. You can look away, or you can face it. But understand, she will not wait for you to choose. For the archetypal woman understands time in a way the unawakened do not. She knows that life is a finite fire, and to waste it in situations that diminish her is to betray the very force that animates her. When she pulls away, she is not abandoning the story, she is rewriting it. She is no longer content to be a supporting character in her own narrative. And so she disappears, not to vanish forever, but to return as someone untouchable by the old patterns that once bound her. The woman you knew is gone. The woman she is becoming cannot be contained. And so, the air between them changes. It is no longer the soft hum of familiar touch. It is the silent gravity of an eclipse. He feels it first as an unease, a restlessness that prowls the edges of his mind. Something about her presence, now sharpened by absence, disorients him. The warmth that once flowed without effort has become a measured offering. She no longer pours herself out in reckless devotion. She measures the cup, weighs the gesture, lets silence carry her meaning. This is not coldness. This is the reordering of a kingdom. In Jung's language, it is the anima withdrawing her projection from the man who could not bear its weight. The image he once embodied, her hope, her refuge, her mirror, no longer serves the truth of her own becoming. And so, she reclaims it, pulls the thread from his shoulders, and weaves it back into her own mantle. Men often misread this moment. They imagine betrayal, punishment, or emotional games. But what they are truly witnessing is the slow unbinding of a soul from an unbalanced contract. She is not retreating into emptiness. She is returning to the source. In every myth worth remembering, the heroine descends into the underworld alone. She meets herself in the dark, touches the bone-deep knowledge that no hand but hers can carry her forward. And here is the paradox that drives him to the brink. The more she turns inward, the more magnetic she becomes. For the unconscious recognizes power, even when the ego calls it aloofness. Her gaze, now less frequent, carries a weight that unsettles him. It is the look of someone who no longer fears loss, because she has survived the loss of herself before, and will not allow it again. He will try to draw her back with words, with promises, perhaps with sudden tenderness that had been absent for years. He will tell himself she is drifting away, when in truth she is rising, like a tide that no longer answers to the moon, but to the deep tectonic shifts beneath the ocean. This Jung understood well. When a woman begins the individuation process, she no longer seeks completion in another. She begins to integrate the parts of herself she once outsourced. The masculine within her, the decisiveness, the assertiveness, the sovereign will, steps forward from the shadows. She does not need him to anchor her. She becomes the shore. And yet her withdrawal is not an act of war. It is an act of preservation. For too long, women have been taught to conflate love with constant availability, devotion with self-erasure. She is rewriting that narrative, word by word, gesture by gesture. In her quiet, she is saying, I will not pour into a vessel that leaks my essence into the sand. Still, you can almost hear the masculine ego chafe against this truth. It prefers the constant validation of being needed. It fears the day when her eyes no longer search the horizon for his return. But here is the sting. The man who can meet her in this new space, not as a rescuer, but as an equal, will find himself standing beside a woman whose love is no longer born of dependency, but of pure choice. To witness such a transformation is to stand at the edge of something primal. It is the rebirth of the archetypal queen, the one who carries both softness and command. She can still love deeply, still give without condition. But now her love flows from abundance, not hunger. And that abundance terrifies those who have only known how to love by possessing. If you have ever been on the receiving end of this shift, understand that you are not losing her to distance. You are losing the version of her that needed you to feel whole. The woman who emerges in her place will not beg for closeness, will not barter her essence for affection. She will meet you eye to eye, soul to soul, or she will walk away without looking back. And in this walking away, there is no malice. Only the serene, almost sacred knowledge that the self she is protecting is worth more than any bond that demands its diminishment. She knows now that love which requires her to shrink is not love at all. And so, when she withdraws into that sacred space, she is not becoming less. She is becoming whole. It is here, in the sanctuary of her own solitude, that she begins to weave together the scattered threads of her psyche. Threads that others have pulled at, frayed, and are knotted over years of silent concessions. This is not the retreat of defeat, but the silence before the symphony. She knows now that no amount of external affection can compensate for the absence of self-allegiance. In this pause, she confronts the voices that were never hers. The words implanted by parents' fears, by lovers' doubts, by a culture that thrives on keeping women small. Jung called these the complexes, the unconscious patterns inherited from the collective human story. And she, with patience that feels like fire, unravels them. She sees the mother's silent endurance and the father's unspoken grief, the archetypes that lived in her blood long before she could speak. One by one, she names them. Naming is power, for what is named cannot hide in shadow anymore. To the man who cannot understand her distance, it may seem cruel. He will feel the absence like an unfinished sentence, his own projections flaring in the vacuum she leaves. But it is not his suffering that defines her movement. She has stepped into a realm where validation from others feels like a brittle currency. Her worth is now measured in how fully she occupies her own skin. The approval she once begged for now feels like a loan she will never again request. When a woman begins this process, she does not broadcast her transformation. It happens in gestures so small, most will miss them. The way her eyes no longer flicker to see who's watching. The stillness in her voice when she says no without apology. The absence of explanation where once she would have over-explained until her throat ached. She learns that mystery is not a game she plays to manipulate, but the natural result of living a life no longer scripted for someone else's comfort. The more she integrates, the less she reacts. Not because she feels nothing, but because she now understands that reaction is often the ego's way of protecting its wounds. In Stoic thought, this is the fortress of reason. In Jung's vision, it is the individuated self, the union of the conscious and unconscious in harmony. Here, she meets herself not as a stranger, but as the sovereign of her own inner world. And yet, make no mistake, this is not a gentle journey. To arrive here, she must watch illusions collapse. She must face the grief of realizing that some connections were built on her silence rather than her truth. She must endure the guilt that society plants in women who choose self over service. But grief is an alchemist, and guilt, when understood, becomes fuel. She will burn both until nothing remains but the pure gold of self-recognition. From this gold comes a different kind of magnetism, not the desperate pull of someone afraid to be left, but the quiet gravity of one who can leave at any moment without fear. This is the paradox. The more she becomes her own source, the more deeply others wish to drink from her presence. But she no longer offers it indiscriminately. Her time, her body, her mind, her spirit. These are currencies of the highest order, and she spends them with precision. The man who sees her now will either rise to meet her or be left behind. There is no middle ground. She no longer accommodates half presence or half love. Her power lies not in punishing the unworthy, but in simply stepping aside and letting absence speak where words once failed. And in that absence, he will either awaken to his own shadow or remain lost in the comfort of his illusions. She knows the risk in this. Some will never return. Some will resent her for showing them a mirror they could not face. But the woman who has entered this realm has made peace with loss. She understands that love without freedom is possession, and possession is a cage. The key was always in her hand. Now she simply remembers how to use it. And so, her withdrawal is not a retreat into nothingness. It is the claiming of the highest ground, a vantage point from which she can see her life in its vastness, unclouded by the fog of dependency. From here, she will decide who may approach, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the life she is still building within herself. The world may call it detachment, but she knows it by its truer name, sovereignty. And so, the dance changes. When a woman steps fully into her power, she no longer plays the game on the same field where she once bled. The battleground of need, approval, and emotional bargaining is abandoned for higher ground, the silent hills where dignity lives. She learns that withdrawal is not absence. It is alignment. It is the soul refusing to be negotiated into smallness. In the eyes of the unawakened, this is abandonment. In the eyes of the wise, it is liberation. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the sacred marriage between the conscious and the unconscious. For the empowered woman, pulling away is the moment she stops mistaking his gaze for a mirror and begins looking into her own. The man who once believed her distance was an act of cruelty will never understand that it was, in truth, an act of profound loyalty to herself. She ceases to be impressed by noise. She stops reacting to the fluctuations of his mood or the lure of his attention because she has entered a deeper rhythm, one set not by the external world, but by the unshakable pulse of her own spirit. The storms he stirs no longer touch the core of her being, because she has learned the oldest lesson. Power is not in controlling the wind, but in mastering the sail. And you, if you watch closely, will see the quiet transformation. Her words become fewer but sharper. Her eyes carry the weight of oceans, but reveal no desperation. She walks not away from him, but toward herself, and in that shift the axis of power tilts entirely. Men unacquainted with the feminine archetype of sovereignty often mistake this for loss of love. But Jung knew that love, when stripped of its illusions, is a crucible. It demands transformation or it perishes. And when she walks away emotionally, it is often the last offering she can give to the relationship's survival. The space she creates is the forge where he must either evolve or watch her vanish into the horizon. Her retreat becomes the mirror he cannot look away from. The sudden absence of her presence stirs the buried truths in his shadow. The fear of being unworthy, the terror of irrelevance, the ache of realizing that her life will go on, radiant, unbroken, without him. This confrontation is not punishment, It is the natural law of energy. You cannot keep what you do not honor. She understands this law now. She knows that to remain where she is unseen is to starve the soul. She knows that craving approval is the quickest way to become invisible. She knows, too, that a man who fears her distance will either rise to meet her in her full expression, or retreat into the comfort of weaker prey. And she is no longer afraid of either outcome. Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." For her, bravery looks like turning away from what diminishes her, even when part of her still longs for it. It means bearing the ache of solitude rather than the slow erosion of self. It means accepting that not every bond is meant to survive the fire, and that the ones which do will never demand her to shrink. If you have ever stood in this space, the threshold between who you were in his eyes and who you are in your own, you know the strange stillness that comes. It is not peace, not yet. It is the silence before the rebirth. In this silence, you will be tempted to run back, to soften, to negotiate against your own worth. But if you hold, if you endure, something extraordinary happens. The longing turns inward, and the hunger becomes for your own life, your own joy, your own soul. This is the point of no return, not because you cannot go back, but because you no longer wish to. The woman who reaches this place has crossed the invisible threshold that Jung, the Stoics, and every wise mystic since time began has tried to describe. It is the place where the self stops asking to be loved and begins embodying love itself, where validation becomes irrelevant because her worth has been signed in blood by the trials she has endured. From here, every step she takes is deliberate. Every word she speaks is a choice, and the world, once loud with demands and judgments, becomes strangely quiet, because she no longer asks for its permission. And in that quiet, her true life begins. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.